I'm painting today on 300-pound watercolor paper as usual, Kilimanjaro brand. This is our reference photo. It's on Unsplash. We will be talking about negative painting today. And what I was trying to tell you guys, I sketched out the focal points. So just this group of flowers, and I kind of very lightly indicated these and these. We really don't have to sketch anything. This is kind of free-flowing, loose watercolor that we will be trying to do today. But to wrap my head around the scale of the painting and not to have them, too small or something like that, it helps to just put one line, very lightly, just one line around these flowers to get the idea of the scale. They will probably get washed away with, watercolor when we start painting, but we will retain that visual, right? And it will help us to get started, because it's kind of scary to start on an empty sheet of paper. But at the same time, we don't want a bunch of lines underneath the watercolor that will kind of spoil our painting, right? Our subject today is negative painting, and we will be practicing it on some spring tulips. I thought that will be an appropriate subject for this time of year. We're all enjoying flowers everywhere, and hopefully you guys taking advantage and painting them. I think it's very inspirational. So today we will try working on these tulips. And I thought that photo was interesting because it's kind of unusual point of view. Usually we see photos of tulips and it's like a flower on that stem, they don't have a curve, or they don't grow in bunches or something. And here we don't see the stems, we just see the flowers and the leaves. And to paint this, we will obviously need to use the technique that is called negative painting. Super important technique in watercolor. That's why I wanted to dedicate a separate session to it. Maybe we'll do even several sessions. So what is negative painting? I'm sure you guys are using it already and you know what it is. Just in case, to refresh our memory, is negative painting is when we paint around something in our painting, when we paint around it, right? And the most common use of that technique in watercolor is because we don't have white. We use the white of the paper for our white subjects, right? And we have to paint around it, and that's when we do negative painting. So if your background is darker than the subject or parts of the subject, you have to paint negatively around those areas, because we can't cover dark areas with white paint. We don't have it, right? We do have it, but we try not to use it too much because it's not going to look right in watercolor. So I prepared some examples for you guys to show you a little bit later. I want to do the first wash on my painting, so it has time to dry, and then we will talk a little bit more about examples of negative painting and how to decide when to use it, and what it actually looks like. So to paint this, let's look at the reference photo. So if we wanted to paint this kind of the long way, the difficult way, right, I would say, we would just paint each area with different colors. We will paint the flowers, we will paint the leaves, and it will take a long time and it will be hard. So I thought, is there a way to speed up this process? And I thought, the leaves are dark for the most part. They have some highlights, but for the most part, they're very dark, and portions of the flowers are dark. So what if we apply a colorful wash to paint all these flowers, the lighter areas of the flowers? That wash will probably be okay under the leaves, right? Especially if it's a color like yellow or orange or something like that. Yellow is part of the green, right? We get green by mixing blue and yellow. So would it matter if there is something already under all these leaves? And I'm thinking probably not. So it will speed up our process. We don't have to avoid all these leaves, and especially we don't have to avoid all those dark areas. Having an underwash under shadows will give us depth, right, and kind of visual interest, variety in the paint. So I think that that's going to work. So we're going to find out right now, and we will start painting with a free-flowing colorful wash. I'm going to put my iPad away, guys, so I don't splatter water on it, but you'll have the reference photo, right? So when I say the words free-flowing wash, we immediately think what? Painting wet on wet, right? So I need to start on damp paper, which I'm going to do by just spritzing it with water. I want some flow, but I don't want like a ton of water on paper. I just want it damp. And of course, I need to spritz my colors. And I need to, I'm going to use a big brush, right? So this is probably a little bit of an overkill. This is the 1.5 inches that I have, but not something tiny. Don't use something super tiny, because that will kind of restrict the amount of water that you will have, restrict your movements, so it will be hard to use. So kind of medium-sized brush, right? And this is our chance to use all our yellows, all our pinks, oranges. So just don't worry about the colors that I'm using. Just use whatever you have. If your tulip is not, exact shade of yellow that you see in the reference photo, who cares, right? It doesn't really matter. And I'm looking at the reference, and I'm vaguely kind of following what I see there, but at the same time, it just really no big deal about, capturing all the colors accurately. Nobody will know what you saw there in the reference. You don't have to tell them, you don't have to show them, and just paint very fun kind of free-flowing wash. The color doesn't need to be super intense. I painted a little sketch when I was getting ready for this live, and I made it, I thought the colors need to be really bright. We do want some intensity, but don't over darken it right from the start, because we will paint some details on the flowers, so you don't want them to be super dark right from the beginning. So this all, you see where I see the leaves, this all can be just yellow or orange or whatever color. So just take it all the way out to the edges. I got some purple mixed in, that's fine, accidentally. And this yellow can go all the way out. And I think you will agree that this is way, way easier than painting each flower separately and trying to keep it all in the right place. Let's use some, I guess I'll stick to opera pink, but we can use other pinks as well. I have this magenta here that can be interesting for these flowers. Mix it with opera pink maybe. I'm almost running out. I was painting so much with opera pink. Maybe switch back to yellow. Go this on this side. There's another yellow flower here, so this will be good. Okay, let's look on this side. We need to connect these. I switched to lemon yellow. Oops. Like I said, the exact color does not really matter. I feel like I can drop in some more orange. I mean opera pink, but it gives me orange. And let's balance the bottom with the top. We see some more those purple ones here. my watercolors are a little bit messed up. I was painting, so I have some purple inside, or pure pink, but it's actually creates interesting effects here on my page. Get this, and there's some yellow there in the back. We will add that. And this is our wash. So very quick, very easy first step. And we will let it dry. And we will talk a little bit more about negative painting. So I started to tell you guys, when do we use negative painting, right? When you see that the subject is lighter than the background and you're painting with watercolors, you immediately understand that you need to paint around that subject. So this is a classic example. White flowers, they're not white in the center, but the edges are white. So what I had to do is paint all this green around them, being very careful and trying to recreate the shapes of those petals. That's the trickiest thing about negative painting. You're not actually painting the subject, you're painting around it, so you need to adjust your mind, right, and see the edge and create that edge by painting away from it, right? So this would be the most obvious kind of classic use of negative painting. I'm showing it to you upside down. So white flowers or any light flower will be a subject that requires negative painting. So here's another one. These daisies, right? This is from my class, From Zero to Watercolor Hero, that a lot of you I know took. So I explained there that, you know, one of the ways to paint those white daisies is negative painting. And again, it's all in the details. You see how I painted those little details inside between the petals? So the more you train your eye to see those dark areas instead of seeing the white flower, the more accurately you'll be able to paint this. So this will be the first use of negative painting. But the flowers don't actually have to be, you know, white. This is a big one, but hopefully you can see it. These are pink flowers, right? But again, because the subject is lighter than the background, I had to paint negatively around them. And then I filled in this space with the details of the flowers. And there are two ways to go about painting this. One way would be to paint the flower first and then paint the background. That's usually what we try to do. I noticed that this approach can be a little bit, I mean, it's easy to make a mistake, let's say, right, when we do this, because everything is white. We're painting a pale pink flower on white sheet of paper, so it's hard for our, we don't have a reference point, right? So it's hard for our eye to decide how dark to make all those shadows on the flowers because everything is white. So I found that it's easier to start with the, if you're painting light flowers, it's easier to paint the background around them, at least give it one wash, get rid of all this white paper. That gives you a reference point, and then you can better see the details and the shadows on the light subject. So just something to think about, and maybe try both ways, because even online I see people posting artwork. They start painting the flower and they say, you know, it doesn't look white and I don't understand why. But first of all, you need contrast, right? You're telling the viewer this is dark and this is light, even though it's not white, but it's light. So you need that enough contrast between the background and the flower to convey that information. And another thing that can happen is that you over darken the flower itself. So no matter how dark you make the background, you don't have the range, right? So you cannot pull that flower out anymore because it's too dark. And that is a fixable problem. If you look closely at this painting, I used white ink, first of all, to correct the edges on my flowers and also to lighten certain areas that I thought were too dark. Like even here, this was all pretty dark and kind of amorphous, and it didn't look right, so I wanted to add a little bit more detail. So I mixed white ink with opera pink watercolor, and I painted those buds in the distance, gave them a little more definition, not too much because I wanted, you know, kind of loose background. And I also added those lighter leaves with ink mixed with green. And so, I mean, even if something like this happens, it's all fixable. Don't give up on your painting. Keep working on it, and you can pull it out. And this is another example I always show. This is negative painting with, you know, details on the flowers, and I totally messed up all the edges, but I was able to correct them by using white ink mixed with watercolor, and I found all those details. And even though the background is fairly dark, maybe even apply 2 layers of ink or something like that. By doing this, you can still get the details, and you can get the contrast and, you know, create the highlights that you need. Okay, and the last example I wanted to show you is this peonies. The same principle, right? Light flowers, dark background, and notice how dark the centers are, right? That's another thing about light flowers that sometimes confuses us. We think everything is light, everything is white or light pink or something like that, but they still have shadows, and those shadows can be pretty dark. And especially there inside where the stamina and the stalk is attached, these areas can be fairly dark, and it's important to have a reference point. So I was looking at this background, and I was asking myself a question. Is this lighter or same as the background, or maybe even darker? And it's basically as dark as the background, and it gave me depth, you know, to my flower, and it created the depth of space, and it helped me to describe the form, that the flower is not flat, but, you know, it has you know, center that's deep down there. Okay, let me look at the chat. Okay, some static. Yeah, let's see, hold on guys, what do I have here going on? I muted this. Yeah, everything is muted. I'll try not to touch the mic, Donna, sorry. Yeah, and if you have a couple devices maybe close to each other, that can interfere as well with the sound. All right, let me see. I don't see the sheen anymore, but I can tell my painting is still damp. So let me use my fancy drawing tool and give it a little, dry it a little bit better. So all this said about backgrounds and stuff, now that we created a colorful wash, so you see guys where I'm leading to, right? Flowers don't have to be white. It's not just, negative painting is not just about saving the white of the paper. It's about light subjects on dark background or surrounded by something darker. So we created those colorful lighter areas with this first wash, and our second step will be to paint the leaves around them. I think this, you know, I kind of thought about painting the details on the flowers first, but I think what we should do is paint the leaves because, like I said, we need a reference point, and that's what we're going to create by painting the leaves. Of course, we have to do it wet on dry, right? We can't work wet on wet anymore because paint will go onto the flowers and we will not be able to save our lighter flowers. So we need dry paper now, and then we can continue working on this, working on darker areas. We will not create those dark areas in one go. It will be 2 layers, right? Because leaves have volume as well, and so they will have variation, slightly lighter, and the shadow areas. So that's what we'll be working on next. And our last step will be to add details and highlights on the flowers and on the leaves as well. Okay, I think this is dry enough. My paper warped a little bit. Let me repin it. And of course, I don't want to use this giant brush anymore. I'm going to switch to my three-quarter inch. Make sure I saturate it with water really well. And in terms of color for leaves, again, it really doesn't matter. Those tulip leaves look to me kind of cool green with yellow tips, kind of warmer tips. So since I'm working on, let's say, mid-tone right now, I will go with probably Cascade green. So it's a cool green, but not super intense or dark or anything like that. And you will have to look at your greens, guys, and decide which one. Or you can mix it, right? You can mix it from blue and yellow if you want. So here is our negative painting. I'm going to paint around those flowers, looking not at the subject, but at the edge between the leaf and the flower. And again, if a shape doesn't look right, or you didn't quite get it in the first go, just leave it alone. Don't try to fix it at the detriment of your painting. And it doesn't matter. You can have a few more flowers, different size shapes or something like that. That's why I think we often pick, I see teachers pick flowers a lot of times as subjects, because it's an organic form. And it's really, you don't have to be super precise when you paint them. You can kind of have some freedom and some fun with them. Okay, so this flower, there's some darker flowers there. There's some leaves here that I'm going to paint. Again, like I said, trying to look for edges. So leaf here. And use the shape of your brush to help you, because by turning it at different angles, you can just make our lives a little bit easier in creating all these shapes. This is all green here. It's a slow process, but it's a lot faster than trying, I'm sure you know from experience, it's a lot faster than trying to paint all these flowers like little area by little area. Okay, so this one. And I'm leaving these little spaces. As you see in the photo, there are like flowers peeking through behind there. So that's what we want to do too, right? We don't want like a solid green background. Let it breathe a little bit, right? Leave this way. There's a big one here. And I'm slightly varying the intensity of the green, but not very much. I just want it to be obvious that, there are some leaves here. Okay, and we can even drop some other colors. We can even start creating shadows while everything is wet. We have to be a little bit careful. I'm going to use a mixture of phthalo blue with my Cascade green. Like here, this is still wet, but we can start creating soft shadows, right? When you hear the word soft, it means painting wet on wet. And see, you don't want this, right? Because these sharp angles are not going to work well, at least in this case. So try to always check the edges and make sure that they look right, because this is all that it's all about the edges in this technique. I remember for the longest time I couldn't understand what are edges, what edges are we talking about. But it's, you know, where two forms meet, that area, depending how you treat it, that's, you know, will give you different results and different kind of people will perceive you painting differently. You see, as I started adding those shadows, my painting immediately kind of looked better and started to take shape a little bit. Let me check. Oh, Donna had to leave. Yeah, recording will be available, guys, and I'll also post on YouTube. Hopefully the sound is okay and you can watch the replay. And like I said, try leaving a little bit of breathing room for those leaves. Don't try to cover like every little square inch of your painting. So variety here is key, right? Those leaves are kind of looking in every different direction and looking towards us, so it's good to make them darker in some areas, lighter in other areas, warmer, cooler. It all adds to the interest of our painting. Okay, and through here, I'll try to speed up a little bit, guys, not to bore you to death with all these leaves. This is a big green shape here. So we will paint around this flower. Big shape here. There's a flower behind there, so we will leave a little bit of space, but this will be a big shape. Paint around this one. This is all connected. Try not to mess up this one, right? Don't paint over it. Okay, and this is all here, and maybe a couple leaves here. Okay, and now I need to do something here for shadows. Running out of Cascade green too, so this will be kind of darker towards this flower, deepen the color. Important, guys, not to skip on pigment, right? If you just make this a puny kind of pale wash, the flowers are not going to stand out. So we need to apply quite a bit of paint to create the shadows and create the depth of space. Okay, so this is the first pass. What do we see now? So the leaves have a little bit of variation and some definition, but the flowers look flat, right? So we need to add a little bit of detail to flowers, but again, edges will be the most important thing. So some edges will be hard and some edges will be soft, and we need to, it's easy to see if we squint when looking at the reference photo. Let me show you guys. I'll take this out. So see how these flowers are kind of, they darken and then they kind of disappear into this shadow, right? It's really hard to tell where this flower ends and, you know, the shadow begins. But right here, the leaf is light and you can see very defined edge, right, between the flower and the leaf. So this is what I'm talking about. We have to look for all these details. That's what creates reality, realism, and interest in our painting, is all these edges that we catch. Like here, it's very hard to tell when one leaf ends and another one begins, but we clearly see the edge on this leaf. And with the leaves, it's easy because we can take opaque white like ink or gouache, mix it with green watercolor, and we will paint all these highlights. It's not a problem, but we do need to create those soft transitions between the flowers and the shadow and the leaves, right? So that will be our next step. And if you're tired when you're painting and you don't feel like doing it anymore, you can take a break and let this dry, because you can soften the edges afterwards even if they dried. But if you feel like, you know, you want to keep painting, then you can keep going with that. Okay, let me look at the chat. I see somebody posted something. Mary is asking if the type of angled brush is important. I like those angled brushes because they're flat, which means they hold more pigment than water, so I can get those really intense colors very quickly. But I think if you have a round brush, it will be fine too. You will probably want a pointy edge. Like I have some round brushes, but they're worn, so the ends are all rounded off. I think it will be hard to get these kind of details that I'm doing with this brush. So you want something pointy to work with. I think that's the most important thing, to have that pointy end. Okay, so let's evaluate our flowers and create some volume in the flowers. So paint some shadows. What I can do, I'm thinking, is soften this edge, because that shadow kind of encroaches on the flower. Maybe drop in a little bit of magenta there to deepen it. And I can create detail and interest in the flower with this. And of course they will have centers, right? They will have little spaces between the petals, which we can do at this stage as well. And this can be all dark. Or we can go back to even opera pink maybe and bring some up here. Here, kind of go lightly, guys. It's better to have less detail than to kind of torture them too much and kind of over dry them. I'll show you my sketch later. I overworked it a little bit. So I'm being a little bit cautious here because, like I said, we want detail, but I don't want too much detail, right? I just want a hint that these are tulips and that they have this kind of darker openings and they have petals, but I don't want them to be too overworked and too dark. So adding details to the flowers, the next step. And trying to vary the paint as well. Use magenta, use opera pink. Give them another wash of opera pink. Maybe connect these a little bit more. See, because they're pointing their little heads towards us, the little openings, and they need to be light, right? We don't want to over darken them. Let's do this one as well. And we need to create the shadow. So Opera Pink, and I'm dragging some of that wet paint into the flower to create the shadow. Asking myself constantly the question, do I see it dark? Do I see a hard edge, or do I see a soft edge? So the bottoms most likely will be soft edges, and on the tops we have more definition, and we most likely will have soft edges, hard edges, I'm sorry. Have a lot of shadow material here. So as you see, the flower is starting to look a little bit more natural, right? These are interesting because they have those stripes on them. So I'm still going to use magenta to give them details, and also create the shadows at the same time. Again, trying very hard not to overdo it. And working fairly quickly and fairly lightly. Do a little transition with yellow. Transition this one. So a little goes a long way here, right, as we say. Okay, let's work on these guys. These are the lightest, so we want the least amount of shadow here. It's a few brush strokes, but we do want to separate it from the background. This orange one is kind of interesting. I like to make orange. I have a couple of oranges, but they're totally unsuitable. Really beautiful orange can be mixed from lemon yellow and opera pink. Especially for flowers, you get kind of peachy color. So I think it works great for certain types of flower. And then you can add a little more opera pink if you need to, or more yellow, and get the color variation. Okay, this is this one. It will have shadows as well, and we have this one, which is also a lot of pink and orange, even more pink I would say than orange. Intense color here and over here. We started a little bit later today, but I'm almost done, guys. So I just want to show you the highlights, and we will be done. So darker openings here. On this flower, it's dark here. Need to do something for this yellow. Just a hint. Okay. This kind of looks ugly. Let me put a couple brush strokes here. Okay, and this is very light flower right there. I guess we'll leave it. I can paint like a couple of shadows with lemon yellow on it, just to, you know, say that it's a tulip as well. But that's about all I would do with the flowers. So with details, go lightly with them, right? Now that our painting is progressing nicely, if we evaluate the result, you can tell that some of the shadows need to be darker. So it will take me just a second to do that. I think I'm going to use magenta. I'm going to mix it into my phthalo blue to give me kind of I would say inky kind of purple color, but with a lot of blue in it. And I'm going to neutralize it with green. Magenta with Cascade Green will give you really beautiful purple, and phthalo blue gives it even more intensity. So in some areas I want to deepen the shadows to give my painting even more depth. And again, don't do it everywhere. Just look at the reference and try to find, squinting really helps. Try to find just a few very dark spots where this is necessary to bring out the flowers. You see, I did it just around this area and immediately it gives me more depth of space. Those leaves are very complicated and it will take hours to paint them exactly as they are in this. If you have the patience for it, that's great. But I don't, so that's why I'm showing you this quick kind of technique. So you can do it even if you don't have a lot of time or you don't feel like spending hours and hours on this painting. And I think it's kind of easier to work like that too because it's less restricting. If you can do this, then you can, you know, make it more and more detailed and more complex if you wanted to. So just deepening the shadows around the flowers to bring them out and give them kind of ground them, give them some substance. Not super dark here, so we will leave it. Maybe just, you know, connect our leaves to the edges of the paper, make it, you know, painting needs to make sense. Define this one a little bit better. Okay, so this is for the depth of space. This needs to dry obviously, but I do want to show you guys the highlights, the difference that highlights will make on this painting. So let me clean up just a little bit. Any more questions about negative painting? You can share your thoughts if that's something you use on a regular basis or you try to avoid it. You know, I know some people paint just on, you know, a subject on white paper, which is can be beautiful, perfectly fine. It's a whole branch of kind of watercolor art, botanical art. You don't paint the background, you just paint your subject, and it can look incredibly beautiful. Okay, so I have room on my palette. I am going to use gouache, I'm thinking, guys, today. I don't feel like using ink, so we need clean space, right? And I have a separate container of water. I washed my brush in it, I guess one time, but it's still pretty clean water. So you don't want to, definitely don't use the water where you were washing your brush with phthalo blue and all that, because all that pigment is going to get dragged onto your painting. So a little bit of white gouache. This is artist gouache, which is the same binder as watercolor. And I'm going to use, again, we need a pointy brush for details. This is Asian art brush, kind of short bristles, but any small brush that you have is going to work. You can also use an angled brush again. This is 1/2 inch, or if you have something small, a dagger brush will be good. Where's mine? This dagger brush, maybe even dagger brush will be better, but we'll see. Something small like this for details, obviously, right? So let's look at the reference photo. Do we see white highlights? I see, the only place I see them is on that flower, but that flower is not in my focal point. So I really don't want to draw too much attention to it. So I'm thinking if I just highlight some areas on these flowers if I need to, but definitely need some highlights on the leaves. So let's start with the leaves. And it's best not to use white for highlights, right? If you don't see white, definitely tone it down. I'm going to use my lemon yellow. I'm going to mix it with watercolor. I'm going to try to find some points and some highlights in the leaves. The complicated forms here. And I need another brush to soften some of the edges that I'm creating. So I definitely see one here, right? You see it, guys? Goes down. They kind of intersect with each other and go inside and out. So it's, like I said, this takes a while, this painting, but it's faster than doing it the other way. Okay, there's some highlights here. We can add this one, yeah, is very, my shadows are still wet, but I'm kind of using it to my advantage because I can move that paint and make my painting more interesting, right? Sometimes the gouache mixes with that wet paint, sometimes it doesn't, so it all creates visual interest in my painting. Of course, I will do a few here. You see how it immediately comes to life, guys, right? Wouldn't you agree? And like I said, if you dry the painting first, you will of course get, it will look a little bit different, but you know, it will still work fine if you want to stop. Okay, these are highlights on the leaves. Thank you, Mary. Let's see if we can give a little more definition to the flowers. I'm thinking with pink, I need to do something with pink. I am going to mix it with my white gouache to get a very light pink color. And this is my chance to correct the edges. If I'm like this one, you see it's kind of jagged edge, but in the reference photo it's smooth. So it's my chance to kind of get it all straightened out and corrected a little bit. I'm getting, the shadow is leaking into the flower, but because I didn't wait, but it's okay. Give them a little texture. This one is very light on the bottom, and I didn't quite catch it. So we're going to lighten this one and give it a little more interest with the petals. Maybe here, highlights. So basically adding highlights, right, to the petals, but we don't want them bright white because they're not. We want them very subtle. These guys can use some highlights on the edges of the petals, but they're pretty dark, so it's important not to overdo it. Just tell the viewer, you know, there was a tulip with brightly lit edges. This one is yellow, kind of got lost there. This guy looks lost. Give him a little more definition. So this is how I would finish this painting. And another quick thing I want to do is add highlights to these guys, but of course I need yellow, right? And I don't need that lemon yellow because they're saturated yellow colors. So I'm going to mix some new gamboge into white to white gouache and give these guys some highlights. And it's also a chance for me to cover any pencil lines that got, started to interfere. You guys probably can't see them, but I can see just faint pencil lines, which is can be very annoying. But we will get rid of them with white gouache. So guys, if you try this painting, make sure you post it on social media, right, or on the community in the challenges section, because I would love to see what you came up with. I'm sure there will be some interesting interpretations, because this is, like I said, a free-flowing kind of creative style. We don't copy the photo, we just kind of use it as inspiration. Okay, I think this is all I'm going to do. Like I said, recording will be available so you guys can watch it again. Let me show you a little bit closer without those glaring lights. And I'll post my photo as well on social media. So it's all wet, but you see that very quickly, in under an hour, we created a pretty complicated painting, I would say. And I think we captured the beauty of those tulips. I wanted to show you guys my sketch. So this is what I did when I was getting ready for this session. And you see I over darkened the flowers, right? If you compare them, I thought I needed that intensity. I also used red to get orange, and opera pink works a lot better. This became a little too heavy. So when you do the initial wash, don't over darken it. It's easy to add pigment later and kind of add the shadows, but you don't want to have to lift or do too many of these highlights, because using opaque white is fine, but you don't want it to everywhere and turn your watercolor painting into gouache painting. So light wash leaves next, deepen the shadows, add a few details on the tulips just to tell the viewer that these are tulips, and then add a few highlights if you need to, a few details, and that's it. All right, any questions? Thank you, Denise. She says so pretty. Yeah, I wasn't sure how this is going to turn out, because I think, guys, you will agree, the photo is pretty complex. I was looking at it and I thought, man, this is so pretty, my favorite colors and tulips, perfect for spring, but how am I going to paint it? But you can, if just pay attention to the edges and vary the tone, right? Create that range of tone between the lightest of the flowers and the darkest of the shadows, and you'll be fine. That will be enough information for the viewer to understand what you're trying to say. Okay, thank you so much, guys. I hope you give this reference photo a try, and I hope you share the painting with me and with everybody else. I hope to see you here in our community room next time. Thank you so much, guys.